April 15, 1944. Skies over Oschersleben, Germany. The air was thin, frigid, and unforgiving at 28,000 feet. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter of Jägerschwader, 26, fought the controls of his Messerschmitt Bf 109G. He had just punched through the wall of American bombers, the heavy thump of their defensive fire echoing in his cockpit. The target was a straggler, a damaged B-17, now falling behind the protective box. Richter dropped his nose, accelerating into the attack. The kill felt inevitable. Then, the warning flashed. A dark shape, impossibly fast, appeared above and behind him. A heavy, blunt-nosed American fighter. Too big for a Spitfire. Too solid for a Mustang. Richter instinctively pushed his stick forward, committing to the desperate escape maneuver. A vertical dive, the ultimate gravity assist escape. The Bf 109 shuddered, its wings screaming against the rapidly increasing velocity. This was the Luftwaffe anchor of survival. Nothing could follow a Messerschmitt in a true high-speed dive. But the dark shape remained glued to his tail. It did not peel off. It did not falter. It just kept falling, an aluminum meteor gaining speed where Richter's machine should have disintegrated. The American pilot was pressing the limits of physics. Richter glanced at his airspeed indicator, a dizzying spiral of speed, then looked back. The machine was closer now, its silhouette unmistakable. The massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The first flash of fire erupted from the Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber machine guns. The rounds did not miss. They ripped into the Messerschmitt's starboard wing root with the sound of tearing sheet metal, forcing Richter to yank the throttle to idle and pull desperately on the stick. He had been outrun in the one dimension where he held mastery. He had survived the encounter, but the reality was terrifying. The rules of air combat had fundamentally changed. The sheer speed and ruggedness of this new American machine, the P-47, shattered the tactical doctrine that the Luftwaffe had relied upon for years in the desperate struggle to defend the Reich. The year 1943 opened with the strategic air war over Europe hanging in a perilous balance. The massive four-engine bombers of the U.S. 8th Air Force, the Flying Fortresses and Liberators, were the spearhead of the Allied strategy, daylight precision bombing designed to cripple the German war machine. This was the core doctrine of the American commitment. They believed that superior technology and defensive firepower would allow the bombers to penetrate deep into the Reich without heavy escort. This belief was quickly and brutally challenged. German air defense, the Reichsverteidigung, was a layered and relentless entity. Initially, the Luftwaffe used the twin-engined Messerschmitt Bf 110 heavy fighter, equipped with powerful cannon, to strike at the bomber formations. When these proved too slow and vulnerable to the bombers' gunners, the faster, more nimble single-engine fighters took over. The Bf 109 and the superior Focke-Wulf Fw 190, armed with heavy-hitting 20mm and 30mm cannons, became the primary interceptors. The crucial problem for the Americans was range. The only Allied fighter capable of accompanying the heavy bombers deep into Germany at the start of the campaign was the British-designed Supermarine Spitfire. However, the Spitfire's operational ceiling was often lower than the bombers, and, crucially, its range was simply inadequate. It could shepherd the bombers to the coast and a short distance inland, but then it was forced to turn back. This moment, the point of no return for the escorts, was infamously dubbed the Fighter Gap. Once beyond the range of their protectors, the bomber crews were isolated. The Luftwaffe pilots knew the timetable. They waited in the clouds for the escorts to depart, then struck with ferocious coordination, often hitting the bomber stream from the head-on position where defensive fire was weakest. Missions deep into Germany, like the notorious raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, demonstrated the cost of this gap. Crippling losses, sometimes exceeding 20% of the attacking force. The entire daylight bombing campaign, the foundation of Allied victory planning, threatened to collapse. The need was desperate and immediate. A fighter, an aerial shepherd, capable of matching the bomber's altitude, cruising the same great distances, and possessing the speed and firepower to defeat the best German interceptors on their own ground. The fate of the entire bomber force depended on this single revolutionary machine, and that machine was already in production, a behemoth of engineering driven by the most powerful radial engine ever built. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was the vision of Russian-born designer Alexander Kartveli. His mandate was simple: create a fighter that could climb to high altitude quickly and hit hard. The resulting design was anything but subtle. It was a brute, an immense airframe built around one overwhelming component: the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP 18-cylinder air-cooled radial engine. This power plant delivered an unprecedented 2,000 horsepower, a figure that swelled even higher with water injection, making it one of the most powerful aircraft engines of the war. The sheer size of the P-47 was initially met with apprehension by pilots. Standing tall and heavy on the tarmac, it earned the affectionate nickname, the Jug, short for Juggernaut, due to its resemblance to a milk jug and its formidable mass. Its empty weight was over 10,000 pounds, nearly twice that of a Spitfire. Many pilots, accustomed to the elegant, delicate handling of the smaller Allied fighters, initially doubted its capability to fight against the nimble German interceptors. Yet, the size was a necessary consequence of two design mandates. The first was the armament: 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, mounted in each wing. This provided a devastating hitting power, a weight of fire unmatched by any single-engine fighter yet fielded. The second, and most crucial, was the complex engineering required for extreme high-altitude performance: the turbo supercharger system. This system was the technical heart of the Thunderbolt. It required a lengthy ducting pipe to run exhaust gases from the engine under the cockpit floor and back to a massive turbine mounted in the rear fuselage. This turbine, spinning at incredible speeds, compressed the thin air of the upper atmosphere and fed it back into the engine, maintaining sea-level power even at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. This mechanism not only solved the power issue at high altitude, but also contributed to the aircraft's legendary ruggedness, providing a near-impenetrable shield of heavy structure that ran the entire length of the fuselage. When the P-47 finally entered combat over Europe in the spring of 1943, its arrival was initially overshadowed by the range limitations inherited from its design. Early versions, equipped with small drop tanks, still couldn't reach deep targets. But as larger, more efficient drop tanks were developed, the Thunderbolt finally unleashed its true potential, transforming the high-altitude air battle into an arena where speed and structural integrity reigned supreme. This heavy machine was not designed for turning dogfights. It was built to exploit the one dimension the Germans could not counter: the unforgiving vertical. The P-47's impact on the air war was multifaceted, moving beyond mere specification sheets and into the realm of tactical revolution. It introduced capabilities the Luftwaffe had simply not accounted for. The true genius of Kartveli's design lay in the utilization of the turbo supercharger. At sea level, the P-47 was a strong, but not exceptional, fighter. Its great weight made acceleration sluggish compared to the lighter Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. However, once climbing past 25,000 feet, the dynamic completely reversed. The German fighters, relying on simpler, mechanically driven superchargers, began to choke on the thin air. Their power curves dropped off steeply, rendering them sluggish and slow. The P-47, conversely, thrived. The exhaust-driven turbo system kept the massive R2800 engine operating near peak efficiency, often maintaining higher manifold pressure than its German counterparts could achieve. This meant that high above the flak and the clouds, where the American bombers flew, the Thunderbolt suddenly became the superior aerial platform. It could climb higher, stay longer, and, crucially, accelerate faster at altitude. This technological advantage allowed the P-47 pilots to dictate the terms of engagement from the privileged position above the enemy, a position that translates directly into speed and energy. Angle 2. The tactical hammer, boom and zoom. The P-47 P-47 was not built to turn. If engaged in a horizontal, low-speed turning fight, a classic dogfight, it would quickly lose energy to the lighter, more agile Bf-109. American pilots, including leading aces like Hubert Hub, Zemke, and Francis Gabreski, rapidly codified a tactic that exploited the Thunderbolt's singular advantages: boom and zoom. This approach was purely about energy management. The P-47 pilot would use the fighter's excellent rate of climb and its high-altitude speed to position themselves several thousand feet above the enemy. They would then commit to a near-vertical dive, the boom, using gravity and their powerful engine to achieve staggering velocities, often exceeding 500 miles per hour. They would fire their devastating 8-gun burst during the fleeting pass, inflict damage, and then, without engaging in a turn, use that accumulated speed and energy to zoom back up to their original altitude, ready for the next pass. The German pilot would be left fighting the air in the empty space where the P-47 had just been. It was a hit-and-run strategy that neutralized the turning ability of the FW-190 and the Bf-109, maximizing the Thunderbolt's dive capability and heavy firepower. The P-47's immense size and seemingly antiquated radial engine layout offered an unintended psychological advantage: survivability. The fighter was heavily armored, and its air-cooled radial engine, unlike the vulnerable liquid-cooled engines of the Messerschmitts and Mustangs, could absorb significant battle damage and still function. The heavy construction necessary for the high-speed dive also translated into incredible structural integrity. American pilots quickly learned that the Thunderbolt could sustain damage that would instantly destroy any other fighter and still limp home. Stories of P-47s returning with entire sections of wing missing or with cylinders shot out of the engine became legend. This phenomenal ruggedness built an almost fanatical confidence in the pilots. Where a Luftwaffe pilot might break off an engagement after taking a few hits, knowing their delicate inline engine could seize at any moment, the P-47 pilot would often press the attack harder. They relied on their aircraft's ability to absorb punishment. This mental edge, rooted in the machine's physical strength, often translated into tactical aggression, pushing German pilots onto the defensive. The arrival and proliferation of the P-47 forced a painful recalculation within the Luftwaffe. German fighter tactics were fundamentally based on the assumption that if they found themselves in trouble, they could always escape in the vertical. Both the Bf-109 and the FW-190 possessed excellent power-to-weight ratios that allowed for quick dives, relying on the structural limitations of the enemy to discourage pursuit. The P-47 shattered this doctrine. German pilots were genuinely stunned by the American fighters' capability to follow them into dives exceeding $500 mph, speeds that would often lead to catastrophic wing failure in their own aircraft due to compressibility effects if pursued too aggressively. Oberleutnant Richter's experience, initially rooted in disbelief, became a common refrain in Luftwaffe debriefings. The P-47 was massive, but its weight was distributed over incredibly strong wings, allowing it to withstand tremendous G-forces and dive pressures. This meant the safest escape route for a German pilot was now the deadliest. The high-speed vertical dive, once the ultimate defense, became a death trap. The American pilots were no longer fighting the Germans. They were exploiting a critical structural vulnerability inherent in the German airframes. The P-47's moment of definitive impact arrived in the late summer and autumn of 1943. Until then, the Allied bomber campaign had been a desperate trade of blood for bombs. Missions were often canceled due to the prohibitive casualty rates. The critical turning point was the integration of the P-47, now equipped with new belly tanks capable of carrying 200 gallons of fuel, extending its escort range deeper and deeper into German airspace, particularly covering the vital corridor to Frankfurt and Stuttgart. A key engagement occurred on November 3, 1943, during a massive raid on the industrial targets in Wilhelmshaven. This time, the P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolf Pack, did not turn back. They remained with the bombers. as the Luftwaffe fighter groups, confident that the Americans were running low on fuel, prepared to execute their standard attack pattern. They were met by Thunderbolts diving from above with tremendous kinetic energy. The German pilots, primarily flying the lighter Bf 109G6, initiated their attacks, seeking to break the bomber formations. When they attempted their established escape maneuver, the high-speed dive, they encountered the P-47s following them down, often at speeds that caused the control surfaces of the Messerschmitts to become stiff and unresponsive due to the onset of compressibility. The P-47 pilots, insulated by their massive airframe and the strength of the airframe, pressed their attacks. Colonel Robert S. Johnson, who would become one of the top P-47 aces, described the process as using the size of the P-47 as a club. In these intense, chaotic high-altitude battles, the Thunderbolt's 8-gun armament proved decisive. A short burst from 8.50 caliber guns delivered over 100 rounds per second, creating a lethal cone of fire that was far more destructive than the single large-caliber cannon often favored by the German fighters. A Bf 109 could often absorb a few hits from a .50 caliber round, but the concentrated volume of fire from a P-47 virtually guaranteed disintegration. The sheer number of impacts overwhelmed the German airframes, tearing away wing panels and control surfaces. This day, and the subsequent raids through early 1944, marked the collapse of the German aerial defense doctrine. The belief that they could simply dive away from danger was gone. German pilots were forced to break off attacks prematurely or risk being destroyed in the vertical chase. The Luftwaffe had lost its tactical high ground, forcing them into less efficient and more dangerous horizontal maneuvering fights or desperate head-on passes. The most telling measure of the P-47 success was the change it forced in the German strategic playbook. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe realized that engaging the heavily armed and high-diving Thunderbolts in protracted, one-on-one combat was suicidal. The Allied bomber campaign was no longer threatened by fighters. The fighters themselves were now the hunted. The sheer attrition rate among German fighter pilots during this period became unsustainable. The P-47s, now flying escort to the deepest targets, decimated the ranks of experienced Luftwaffe veterans. German fighter control units began issuing increasingly desperate and often contradictory tactical directives. One notable attempt to counter the P-47 was the introduction of the Sturmbach battering ram formations. These were groups of heavily armored Focke-Wulf Fw 190s, often armed with massive 30mm cannons, whose sole purpose was to ignore the escorts, charge directly into the bomber formation, and destroy the B-17s through sheer blunt force. The P-47 pilots, however, were ready for this. The Sturmbach formations were slow and relatively unmaneuverable due to their heavy armor plating. This made them perfect targets for the high-speed boom and zoom attacks. P-47 groups would sweep down on the specialized Sturmbach forces, relying on their superior speed to position themselves for the attack and their overwhelming firepower to break up the tight, defensive German formations before they could reach the bombers. The ensuing battles, like the massive air fight over Brunswick in January 1944, became slaughterhouses for the German pilots. The P-47 had successfully eliminated the fighter gap and, by extension, had destroyed the effectiveness of the Reichsverteidigung as a unified, lethal defensive force. The shift was profound. For the first time in the war, the Americans achieved daylight air superiority over the German homeland. This dominance was cemented not only by the P-47's ability to destroy enemy fighters, but also by its ability to protect the bombers, allowing the crippling strikes on synthetic oil plants, airfields, and rail networks to continue uninterrupted. The consequences were far-reaching. By the spring of 1944, the experienced fighter arm of the Luftwaffe was largely broken, its veterans killed or captured. Those who remained were young, poorly trained replacements facing an overwhelming technological and numerical advantage. The skies above Europe were clear for the preparation of the greatest invasion in history, an invasion that could not have been launched without air superiority. With the threat of the Luftwaffe essentially contained and their tactical capability severely diminished, the P-47 Thunderbolt, or the Jug, rapidly transitioned from a dedicated high-altitude escort fighter to one of the most feared fighter bombers, JBO, of the European theater. This shift was a direct consequence of the achieved air superiority. The Thunderbolts were no longer needed solely to protect the bombers. They were now tasked with clearing the path for the ground forces. The P-47's immense size and rugged construction, the same qualities that made it a durable high-altitude escort, made it an unparalleled platform for ground attack. Its massive wings could accommodate a variety of heavy ordnance, up to 2,500 pounds of bombs or 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets. Paired with its 8.50 caliber machine guns, the P-47 became a flying arsenal capable of absorbing intense ground fire and delivering devastating payloads. In the months leading up to D-Day and immediately following the Normandy landings in June 1944, the P-47 became the instrument of tactical air power. Pilots flew multiple sorties daily, sweeping low over the French countryside to execute what were known as armed reconnaissance missions or interdiction. Their targets were the arteries of the German war effort: trains, supply trucks, tanks, troop concentrations, and critically, artillery positions and communication lines. The psychological impact of these low-level attacks was immense. The Germans, accustomed to fighting ground battles without constant threat from the air, now faced a relentless aerial harassment. The roar of the R-2800 engine became synonymous with immediate danger. The Thunderbolts would strafe, dive bomb, and rocket German columns with pinpoint accuracy, often isolating frontline units by destroying their supply chains miles behind the actual battlefront. This ability to suppress and destroy German mobility was pivotal in slowing the German response to the D-Day invasion and ensuring the Allied breakout from the Normandy beachhead. The statistical legacy of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt underscores its critical role in securing Allied victory in the West. It was deployed in vast numbers. Over 15,600 units were eventually built, making it the most produced American fighter to use a single radial engine. Its air-to-air victories over the European Theater of Operations, ETO, were substantial, credited with the destruction of nearly 4,000 enemy aircraft in the air, a total only narrowly surpassed by the P-51 Mustang. Crucially, however, the P-47's true measure of effectiveness lay in its ground attack record. By the end of the war, P-47 pilots in the ETO were credited with destroying approximately 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, tanks, armored cars, 68,000 trucks, and other vehicles. This level of material destruction amounted to a wholesale dismantling of the German logistic network. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, recognizing the overwhelming impact of Allied air superiority, famously lamented that the fighting in Normandy was fundamentally different from North Africa because the enemy has complete mastery of the air. The continuous, devastating raids by the P-47s crippled German mobility to the point where they could not reinforce their positions, nor retreat effectively. The P-47 earned deep respect from its pilots. Its incredible durability meant that, despite absorbing tremendous damage, the Thunderbolt had the lowest overall pilot loss rate per sortie of any American fighter. Pilots returned to base with pieces of flak embedded in their armor, holes the size of soccer balls in their wings, and the engine cowling mangled, yet the powerful R-2800 and the robust structure held. Its enduring nickname, the Jug, became synonymous with resilience and brutal effectiveness. It was the heavy fist of the Allied Air Force, the machine that first broke the German fighter defenses at high altitude and then hammered the German army into immobility on the ground. The P-47 Thunderbolt was, in many ways, an aerial manifestation of the industrial might and tactical necessity of the American war effort. It was not the most aesthetically pleasing fighter, nor the most graceful. It was a pure machine of engineering consequence. Its dominance was not achieved through delicate maneuverability, but through the brute force of its engine, the strength of its structure, and the overwhelming weight of its armament. The Thunderbolt's legacy lies in its demonstration that energy fighting and structural integrity could fundamentally negate the traditional advantages of lighter, more nimble interceptors. It introduced a dimension of combat, the unyielding, vertical, high-speed dive, that rendered the Luftwaffe's established escape tactics obsolete. It forced the German High Command to confront a terrifying reality. The Allies could not only bomb their deepest targets, but could also reliably defend the bombers all the way there and back. More than any other factor, the P-47's resilience became a moral component of the war. For the bomber crews, the sight of the blunt-nosed, massive fighter was an assurance of survival. For the pilots, the sheer ability of the Jug to take a pounding and bring them home fostered an unwavering faith in their machine. This emotional reliability was a hidden weapon, sustaining the human will against the terrifying odds of air combat. Ultimately, the P-47 Thunderbolt served as the essential transitional fighter of World War II. It was the heavy, dependable hammer that shattered the German air defense and cleared the skies, preparing the stage for the lighter, longer-ranged P-51 Mustang to exploit the air superiority that the Thunderbolt had so brutally won. The Jug was the workhorse that ensured the war could be won on the ground by first conquering the air.